The bell had rung 10 minutes ago, and the hallways outside the classroom still buzzed with the chatter of students rushing to their lockers and the echo of sneakers slapping against linoleum. But here, inside room 204, the world was quieting down. One by one, my classmates had packed their bags, slung straps over their shoulders, and drifted out into the evening. Laughter and voices spilled in through the doorway every time it opened, until finally the last person left and the door swung shut behind them with a soft click. I stayed where I was, my notebook still open, pen hovering above half-finished notes. I wasn't in a rush. There wasn't anything waiting for me outside. Not today. So I lingered, staring at the chalkboard where equations and scribbled instructions were fading into a haze of dust. At the front of the room, she remained. Ms. Bennett, my English teacher. She wasn't grading papers the way she usually did after class, her red pen flying across assignments while she half-listened to students' questions. Instead, she was organizing a stack of books, aligning them neatly, as though the symmetry of straight edges could bring order to the day. Her hair, dark brown with subtle streaks of lighter shades, was tied back, but a few strands had slipped loose, falling against her cheek. She glanced up once, noticing me still sitting there. Her expression flickered, curiosity, maybe mild surprise, but she didn't say anything right away. She just kept moving through her quiet routine, the scrape of books sliding against her desk the only sound in the room. I shifted in my seat, feeling suddenly out of place, though I wasn't ready to leave. The empty classroom had a different weight when it was just two people. The air was thicker, the silence deeper. "You're not heading out?" she finally asked, her voice soft, carrying easily in the stillness. Cleared my throat. I thought I'd finish my notes. Didn't want to fall behind. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment. Then she gave a small smile, the kind that wasn't part of her usual classroom performance. "That's rare enough. Most of them bolt before I finish my sentence." Her words carried no judgment, just quiet amusement. I let out a faint laugh, though my chest felt oddly tight. "Guess I'm not most of them." "No," she said, almost to herself. "You're not." She returned to her desk, sitting on the edge instead of behind it, flipping through a stack of papers she'd been holding. The posture felt casual, less like a teacher behind a barrier and more like a person. For a moment, I saw her differently. Not the authority at the front of the room, but someone who stayed behind in the dimming light of late afternoon, just as much a part of this place as I was. The sun dipped lower outside, its glow filtering through the blinds and painting lines across the desks. The clock ticked softly above the door, counting down the last moments of daylight. I could have left then, packed my things and joined the flow of students heading home. But instead, I stayed, watching the light shift, feeling the hum of a moment that didn't want to end. She looked up again, her eyes meeting mine. For just a second, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched, unfamiliar and heavy, as though we had both stumbled into something neither had planned. "Would you mind helping me for a bit?" she asked finally. Her tone was even polite, but there was something beneath it, something I couldn't name. "Sure," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. She gestured to the stack of books beside her desk. "These need to go back to the shelves. It'll go faster with two." I stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor, and walked to the front of the room. The books weren't heavy, but my hands felt clumsy as I carried them, aware of her presence beside me. Together, we slid them into their places, the quiet punctuated only by the soft thud of spines against wood. When the last one was set, She exhaled lightly, brushing her hands against her skirt as if dusting them off. "Thank you," she said, her eyes lingering on me for a fraction longer than necessary. And just like that, the air shifted again. The classroom, once only a place of noise and routine, now felt suspended, caught between the ordinary and something unspoken. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything began to change. The last rays of sunlight had slipped lower, throwing long amber streaks across the rows of desks. The classroom didn't feel like a classroom anymore. It felt like a different kind of space, as if time slowed down once the noise of the other students was gone. The chalkboard loomed in the background, half covered in notes from earlier in the day, but all my focus was at the front of the room. Ms. Bennett leaned back slightly against her desk, one leg crossed over the other, flipping through a folder of assignments with absent-minded movements. She wasn't reading them, not really. Her eyes kept drifting, as though her thoughts were somewhere else. Eventually, she set the folder aside, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me. "You're quieter than most of them," she said. "Quieter, but you pay attention. I've noticed." I shifted my weight, unsure how to respond. "Is that good or bad?" Her lips curved into a small smile. "Good. Very good. Though it makes me wonder why you don't speak up more." I gave a shrug. "Guess I don't like the spotlight." "You do well with it, though," she said, her tone thoughtful, almost too soft for a teacher addressing a student. "You've got things to say. More than you let on." Her words hung in the air, warmer than I expected, and I had no idea what to do with them. Compliments from teachers usually felt mechanical. "You're bright. Keep it up. You should apply yourself more." But this wasn't that. This was different, personal. I busied myself gathering my notes, even though they didn't need organizing. Anything to keep my hands from fidgeting. I don't think anyone wants to hear it, I guess." Her gaze softened. "That's where you're wrong. The right people always want to hear it." I met her eyes then, and something inside me tightened. It wasn't the usual look she gave in class, the stern, patient stare that made everyone sit up straighter. This was gentler, almost searching, as though she was seeing something in me I didn't even recognize in myself. The silence thickened again, and I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the distant hum of the hallway outside. I thought she might dismiss me then, tell me to head home, but instead, her voice dropped slightly, low and steady. "Close the door." I froze. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. The words were so simple, yet they carried an entirely different weight in the empty classroom. "Sorry?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She tilted her head toward the doorway. "Close the door," she repeated, her tone still even, but there was something beneath it I couldn't place. I hesitated, but my legs moved before I could think better of it. Crossing the room, I reached the door, pulled it gently until it clicked shut. The sound echoed faintly in the quiet, final in a way that made my pulse quicken. When I turned back, the room felt even smaller. She was still leaning against the desk, watching me. The light from the blinds striped across her face, cutting her expression into half shadow, half glow. "Thank you," she said simply, as if it were nothing more than a practical request. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. I walked back slowly, every step louder than it should have been. My notebook sat abandoned on my desk, but I didn't dare move toward it. Instead, I stood there, halfway between student and stranger, wondering what exactly I had just stepped into. She broke the silence first. "You know, it isn't often I get to talk with students like this. Not when the classroom's full. Not when everything is a performance. Her voice was different now, less like a lecture, more like a confession. I swallowed. Why me? She smiled again, but it wasn't a teacher's smile. It wasn't one of those polite reassurances meant to encourage. It was softer, edged with something I couldn't quite name. Because you stay. Because you notice things. And because I think you understand more than you let on. Her words landed with a weight that settled deep in my chest. I wanted to ask what she meant, to push further, but something held me back. Maybe fear. Maybe the awareness that the ground beneath us had already shifted, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. Still, as she picked up her folder again, her fingers idly tracing the edge of the papers without focus, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just another after-school chat. And whatever this was turning into, it had only just begun. The sound of the door clicking shut still echoed faintly in my ears, though it had been minutes since I'd turned the handle. The classroom felt transformed by that small act, as if shutting the world out had rewritten the rules inside. What had once been just 4 walls and rows of desks now felt like a space entirely our own. Quiet, sealed off, pulsing with something I couldn't quite name. Ms. Bennett didn't move right away. She stayed seated on the edge of her desk, one hand resting lightly against a stack of books, the other tapping a slow rhythm against her knee. Her eyes followed me as I shifted back toward my desk, but there was no urgency in her gaze. Instead, there was patience, an unsettling kind of patience, as though she were waiting for me to realize something she already knew. "Strange, isn't it?" she said finally, her voice low, almost conversational. "How different a room feels when it's empty." I nodded, though my throat was dry. "Yeah, feels quieter." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, but something close. "Quieter," she echoed, "but not empty." The words landed heavier than they should have, and I wasn't sure how to answer. Instead, I found myself focusing on the details around me. The streak of sunlight slipping through the blinds, the faint scent of chalk and coffee that clung to the room, the way the ticking clock seemed louder now. Every small detail magnified, as if my senses had sharpened the moment that door closed. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands together. "Tell me something," she said. "Why do you stay behind, really? It can't just be the notes." I hesitated, caught. The truth was, I didn't fully know. Part of it was avoiding the noise outside. Part of it was the comfort of not having to go home right away. But another part, the one I hadn't admitted even to myself, was that I didn't mind being here in this space with her. "I guess I just like the quiet," I said finally. Her eyes lingered on me, searching, as though weighing my answer. "The quiet can be dangerous sometimes," she said softly. "Dangerous?" I asked, trying to mask the way my pulse jumped. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pushed herself up from the desk and began to walk slowly between the rows of chairs. Her hand drifted along the backs of desks as she passed them, her movements unhurried, deliberate. "You start to hear things you normally wouldn't," she continued. "Thoughts get louder. Silences say more than words." Her footsteps echoed softly against the floor, filling the space between us with a steady rhythm. She stopped a few feet away, the slats of light from the blinds cutting across her face, softening her features, shadowing her eyes. "And sometimes," she added, her gaze never leaving mine, "you notice things you weren't supposed to." My chest tightened. "Like what?" Her expression shifted, subtle but undeniable. A flicker of something unreadable, caught between seriousness and amusement. Like the way someone looks at you when they think you're not paying attention, or the way you've been looking at me for the past 10 minutes. The air seemed to vanish from the room. I opened my mouth, closed it again, my thoughts colliding in a rush of denial, confession, panic. Before I could form a reply, she turned away, moving toward the window, adjusting the blinds slightly so that the light fell differently across the room. Her voice came softer now, almost distant. "Don't worry. I'm not upset. I just noticed things. Always have." I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The tension in the room didn't dissipate, though. It thickened, wound tighter. Every glance, every pause, every word seemed to carry a double meaning, layered and heavy. She turned back toward me, resting one hand against the windowsill. "You're not like the others," she said. "They rush out the second the bell rings. You stay. You see more. You listen." "I don't know if that's a good thing," I admitted. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she looked less like a teacher and more like someone letting their guard down. "It is," she said simply. "Though sometimes it makes life harder." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Not exactly, but it was charged, vibrating with everything neither of us dared to say aloud. I realized then that staying after class hadn't been a small decision. It had led me here, into this suspended moment, where the lines between teacher and student, authority and curiosity, began to blur. And when she finally pushed away from the window, her voice steady but quieter than ever, I knew we'd crossed into territory we couldn't easily step back from. "Some things," she said, "aren't meant to be shared. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly, though part of me wasn't sure I did. But I knew this much. The classroom I'd walked into earlier wasn't the same one I stood in now. Something had shifted. Something unspoken had taken root. And it was only going to grow stronger. The classroom seemed to hum with a strange electricity, the kind that doesn't come from light bulbs or wires, but from silence stretched too tight. I stood near my desk, notebook forgotten, while Ms. Bennett lingered by the window, her hand brushing absently against the blinds. Outside, the sky was deepening into shades of orange and violet, the day giving way to evening, but inside the room time felt paused. She turned, finally, and crossed the room again with unhurried steps. Her heels clicked softly against the linoleum floor, a sound that marked the space between us like a metronome. When she reached her desk, she leaned back against it, folding her arms loosely, her gaze settling on me with a weight that made it impossible to look anywhere else. "You're going to remember today," she said quietly. The words sent a chill down my spine. They weren't a threat, not exactly. They weren't casual either. They carried the weight of something certain, something she wasn't asking me to believe but telling me was true. I swallowed hard. "Why?" Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because some moments stay with you. They carve themselves into your memory whether you want them to or not." She let the silence stretch after that, long enough for the ticking of the clock above the door to fill the air again. Each second felt louder than the last, hammering home the truth of what she'd just said. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost a whisper. "This, whatever it is between us, it doesn't leave this room. Do you understand?" My breath caught. The way she said it, the way her eyes locked onto mine, it felt like she wasn't just making a rule, but sealing a pact. "Yes," I said, my voice lower than I expected. "Good." The word lingered in the air like smoke. She glanced away then, picking up the folder of papers on her desk. shuffling them with deliberate movements that felt too precise, too controlled. It was as though the act of rearranging them gave her something to anchor herself to, something that wasn't the unspoken current pulsing between us. But even as she did, the atmosphere didn't lighten. If anything, the weight of what had just been said pressed down harder. Because now it wasn't just tension, or silence, or a fleeting look. Now it was a secret. She set the folder aside and reached for her bag, slipping it over her shoulder. The movement was ordinary, yet in the stillness of that moment, it carried a finality that made my chest tighten. She wasn't dismissing me with words, but the gesture said enough. The day, this strange and suspended time, was ending. "You should head home," she said, her voice steady again, though softer than usual. I nodded, gathering my things slowly. My notebook slid into my bag, my pen tucked neatly away, each action mechanical but heavy. When I finally stood, I glanced back at her one last time. She was watching me, her expression unreadable, her eyes steady. "Remember," she said, just that one word. And then I was moving toward the door, my hand on the handle, the hum of the hallway beyond filtering faintly through the cracks. For a second, I hesitated, my back to her, the weight of everything pressing down. Then I pulled the door open and stepped out. The hallway felt jarringly ordinary. Students' voices echoed in the distance, lockers clanged shut, and the faint smell of cafeteria food still lingered. But I walked through it in a daze, every sound muffled, every movement blurred. Because inside that classroom something had changed. She was no longer just Ms. Bennett, my teacher. She was the woman who had looked me in the eye and told me to close the door, who had turned silence into something alive, who had entrusted me with a secret I hadn't asked for but couldn't let go of. And she was right. I was going to remember, not just today, forever.